If you're like me, you own a lot of games on Steam. I have a habit of buying games on sales that I think look cool, buying them in bundles, and getting given keys free from websites like the Humble Bundle. Because of this, I have about 276 games in my library, only 109 of which I've played, and yes, I did count. So I thought, considering we're all stuck inside hiding away from people at the moment, I would go through everything I've not played and played anywhere from half an hour to an hour of each, depending on how much I enjoyed a game or how complex I think it is, and I'll review my first impressions of each game. Some games I'll complete in the future, some I'll uninstall and never play again. We have a lot to get through, so let's start with the first game in my library alphabetically. First off, we have The Adventure Pals. The Adventure Pals is the first game from Australian/British indie developer Massive Monster. It's an action platformer inspired by classic platforms as well as cartoons. While I don't think I got far enough into the game to completely judge it, what I can say is what I played I really enjoyed. It's very bright and colourful, and the designs are for the most part incredible. It's one of the best looking 2D platformers in this style that I've ever played. It's clear that the devs have an incredible sense of creativity in not just the character designs but the game's story as well. You play a boy who has to save his dad from being turned into a hot dog. You have the help of a pet rock and your pet giraffe whose tongue spins like a helicopter, allowing you to fly briefly. You know, it's that cliched story again that we've seen countless times. The game has that very weird and surreal sense of humour that many 2010s kids shows like Adventure Time and Gravity Falls had, and it works really well. The dialogue in the game is especially funny, and much of the enemy designs are equally as ridiculous. I especially like the villain who farts when you hit it and the one that looks a bit like a fleshlight. The game has a very similar style to the sort of games Behemoth makes, and there were many points where I was heavily reminded of Battle Block Theatre for better and for worse. The gameplay isn't too unique or original, and although I found it fun, I did find it to get a little bit repetitive towards the end of my play session. It's a game that is fun in short bursts, but I don't think I could have played it much longer than I did. Difficulty wise, it's pretty accessible, but I assume the further you get into the game, the harder it will get. The combat is very basic and mostly comprises of just bashing a button over and over with the occasional dodging on harder enemies. The level design also seemed pretty basic from what I played, and it all kind of seemed like the same level, but it's possible as the game progresses again this will change. If you like fast-paced action platformers like things like Battle Block Theatre, then I do recommend this game because for what it is, it's a lot of fun. It's far from original or groundbreaking, but it's an enjoyable experience. I can see myself playing it some more, but definitely more in short bursts here and there rather than trying to complete the whole thing. When it comes to first-person shooters on the PC, the Arma games are generally considered some of the best in the genre. Their modding communities are also some of the most prevalent in PC gaming, with the DayZ mod being one of the most famous mods of all time, even getting its own spin-off game. I haven't played any of the games, but I had Arma Cold War Assault for a long time, so I thought I'd give it a go. The game is actually a 2001 game called Operation Flashpoint Cold War Crisis, but in 2011 it was re-released under the Arma name. There are elements I did enjoy. I really liked the very realistic style to the gameplay and how tactical it is. It's not like Call of Duty and similar shooter games where you just kind of go in guns blazing. You are given objectives to follow and you are instructed when to shoot an enemy and the sort of tactics and stuff that you have to face. But this game has aged really terribly. The controls are very awkward and janky, the graphics are pretty terrible, and the cutscenes are laughably bad. While this argument can be used for some other shooters from this era, for example Half-Life, the gameplay just isn't engaging enough to stop it from feeling really clunky, which Half-Life did have. I'm sure in 2001 this game was amazing, but now it doesn't work at all. Armello is an RPG strategy digital board game in which you play a member of an animal clan who has to work its way around the board to eventually storm a castle. This is a game that I think is technically really good, visually beautiful and works a charm, but it's just not my thing. I believe I only got this game because it came in a humble bundle where there was another game in there that I wanted. If I hadn't gotten it with a bundle, then I highly doubt I would have got the game. I can admit for what it is very good, and if you're into this sort of thing, then I highly recommend it, but this just isn't my cup of tea. Assault Android Cactus, the best game name of all time. This game is a twin-stick shooter with a very colourful, vibrant, cartoony look, which kind of is like if Pixar made a Mega Man movie. The game is incredibly fast-paced in a very intense and incredibly fun way. This is a game that I definitely think I'll return to just because of how fun and simple it was. If you love twin-stick shooters like this, then I highly recommend the game. It's visually great, controls really well, and is a really fun time. It's pretty much one of those games where if you look at the footage I'm showing on screen and think it looks cool, you'll definitely enjoy the game. There's loads of different characters and weapons you can choose from, allowing you to adapt to whatever way you prefer to play, whether it's going in completely guns blazing or taking everyone out one by one. While I did find that there were points where there was so much going on it was visually overwhelming, I feel like a lot of it was intentionally done to create a very claustrophobic and intense feeling while also being very fast and exciting. I didn't get far enough into the game to completely judge it, I don't think, and from the looks of things, the bosses especially get a lot tougher and more creative the more progress you make, so I'm definitely looking forward to checking it out again at some point. Similar to Adventure Pals, this is a game I think I'll play again for a little bit, maybe eventually complete, but it's definitely not one I'm going to play religiously and prioritize over other games. Bionic Commando from 2009 is a sequel to the 1988 NES game. The original game definitely has a lot of that classic Metroidvania and Contra style and is widely considered one of the platform's best games. The sequel takes a lot of the basic ideas of the original game and modernizes it into a 3D setting. The game essentially feels like if you took the swinging mechanics from Spider-Man and blended it in with the look and feel of Gears of War. And if there's one big problem I had with what I played of the game, it was just how derivative it felt. There was never a point where I wasn't reminded of other games, especially Gears of War, which I felt like at times the game definitely tried to completely copy way too much. The grappling arm mechanic was really what set it apart and made it fun to play. Had this not been a part of the game, then I definitely would not have enjoyed it at all. I definitely think this may be a case where I need to spend more time with the game, as in the short periods of time I played it, I never left the city location the game starts in, and I found it to be really repetitive and boring. I found this game really dull and unoriginal. It's not a bad game by any means, and I would recommend it if you're looking for a fun little third-person shooter, but don't go into it expecting some overlooked modern classic like a lot of people seem to consider it to be. Bone, out from Boneville, is a 2005 point-and-click adventure game based on Jeff Smith's famous comic book series. I was excited to play this game because I loved the look of it. I really love point-and-click adventure games. They're one of my favourite genres of games, and it was one of the first games from Telltale Games, who have made some of my favourite games in the genre. I spent over an hour with the game, supposedly about 40% through, and I just struggled to get into it. The story is very fun and full of vibrant and enjoyable characters. The look of the game is fun, and I found the dialogue as well as dialogue options to be very charming and funny, but it just isn't a very fun game overall. It's basically a comic with little mini games thrown in, and many of these mini games are super repetitive to play, especially the hide and seek one, which is one of the most boring, repetitive, and goddamn annoying things I've ever played in a game of this style. I spent so much time playing the hide and seek game because they make you play it twice. I thought I was literally going to kill myself because I was so frustrated playing it.
Cold.
Where is he?
Forget it, kids. I'm out of here.
I definitely spent my time with the game thinking that I will probably really like the comic if I ever check that out, but the games I just don't think are that great. There was a sequel called The Great Cow Race, which I also own and plan to play and review alongside it, but I'm not really sure I can be bothered. Supposedly it's better than the first game, but I don't really want to take the risk. Citizens of Earth was easily one of the best games of this bunch that I played, and this is coming from someone who has played very few turn-based RPGs like this. In fact, I think South Park The Stick of Truth may be the only one apart from a couple of the old Pokemon games. This game is a really great satire on modern day politics in which you play the vice president who is an incredibly dumb man-child. It's a parody of Earthbound and shows you walking around his hometown, collecting people for his party, fighting protesters, opponents, and sentient flowers all along the way. The humor is really top notch and the writing and voice acting is absolutely perfect. While I wasn't sure about the cartoon look at first, it definitely quickly won me over and I think it looks fantastic. I'm still not the biggest fan of combat systems like this, which is probably the one thing that put me off, but that just may be because I am really bad at it, and if I play the game more and get the hang of the combat system, then I may enjoy it more. There are things I wasn't too keen on, especially how often you have to fight enemies. There was a point where I literally couldn't walk for a minute straight without getting caught by an enemy, but apart from that, I really like this game and it's definitely one that I'll be putting high on my list of games to complete. Koby Treasure Deluxe is Poyo Poyo. Corporate Lifestyle Simulator is one of the games I sunk the least amount of time into, simply because it's one of those games that once you start playing it, you basically know exactly what the game's going to be. It's an isometric zombie game set in an office. It starts off with some of the worst voice acting I've ever heard, and then it just throws you into the game. It's the first game from Dolphin Barn, and you can definitely tell it's a first game, but not completely in a bad way. The game does have a lot of charm, it's simple, and it's pretty funny at times. Its satire on corporations and businessmen is definitely very obvious to the point where it can be a little bit grating, but the game isn't bad by any means. You go around killing zombies and saving the survivors in the office block. You can kill the zombies by punching them, throwing things at them, or eventually shooting them. I definitely liked that all the environments were completely destructible, and I'm a sucker for pixel art and chiptunes. This is a game that's been included in plenty of bundles and given away free on websites multiple times, so there's a high possibility that you're gonna already own it. I was reading the Steam reviews and most of them said that they had it and had no clue they owned it. But even if you don't have it, it's only £3.99 at full price, and for a bit of cheap fun, you can't go wrong with it. I had never played the original CounterStrike before. I've played CSGO and Source before, but never the original. I'm terrible at these games, so I was never going to completely enjoy playing it. It's obviously a great game, and the fact that a first-person shooter from 2000 still has working servers and a large player base really amazing. I'm just terrible at this game. It's definitely obvious that its issues were ironed out over the subsequent games, so I'm not going to sit here and get all up in arms about the flaws and the controls and stuff like that. It's a classic for a reason. It's not aged too well, but it's not a terrible game. I just personally really suck at it. Speaking of games I suck at, Crawl. Crawl is probably the second best game I played in this bunch. I'm terrible at brawlers, but even despite dying a lot, I found this game so enjoyable and fascinating. In the game, you play a hero who is going around a dungeon. You get attacked by 3 spirits who control parts of the room, bring to life enemies, and try and kill you. Whoever kills you first is resurrected as a human, and you become one of the spirits trying to kill him. It's a game that can be played in local multiplayer or with free bots. This is maybe one of the most original and unique games I played in this session. It takes elements of Gauntlet and The Legend of Zelda and turns it into an unconventional action party game, which I'm sure is much more fun with friends than it is solo, because yeah, I played it by myself.
Hello darkness, my old friend.
But by myself, I had an absolute blast with this game. Visually, it's great. The idea behind it is incredible. I highly recommend this game, even if you're not a fan of dungeon crawlers. We're gonna finish this video off with a game that is probably the most simple game of the bunch, Daggers. It's a first-person shooter where all you have to do is kill the skulls that are coming after you. If they touch you, you have to start the game again. The longer you play, the more skulls appear and the more points you get. It's a very straightforward game, but it is also terrifying. The fact that one touch kills you and sends you to the beginning again makes the game so tense, especially when the speed ramps up and there's hundreds of skulls flying at you at once. The fluidity of the controls feels very much like a game like Quake or Unreal Tournament, and it's very obvious that the devs are big fans of those games. There's no story to the game, it's just simply shooting daggers at skulls, and it's incredibly fun. This is definitely the best game I played, and I definitely see myself sinking a lot of time into it because it's simply a game that you can just pick up whenever you're bored and just have a good time with without having to worry about getting engrossed in this story and collecting things and stuff like that. And I think I'll leave it at that for now. I have a lot more games to cover in the future, and I keep buying more games because I have a problem, so there'll be more of these. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel. The next part will probably be out pretty soon if this quarantine doesn't let up, and from the looks of things, it's not going to. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.